Welcome to Denver Startup Week, Publishing a Revolution. I am G. Von Knight. I'm with Creative Startups. We are hosting this session as well as 13, 15, 17 others during this week. We're really excited to be here. I was going to throw up our sponsors just so that we could give a shout out and a thank you to AG 2.0, Colorado University.
That was totally awesome. I totally did that. Just saying.
Cheers for Business, Slack, and the Downtown Denver Partnership, as well as we are Publishing a Revolution as part of the designer track. So we're a big thank you to Western Union. And all of those things in tiny print. Yay. So Creative Startups is the leading accelerator for creative entrepreneurs in the world. We have accelerators, we have 4 around the world, as well as pre-accelerated programs. We believe that creative entrepreneurs are just entrepreneurs. And when they find their tribe and the people that help them be great, they are just great. So this panel, wait, I was supposed to talk about something else, wasn't I?
Oh, I should have done that.
There we go. So a small bit about us. We're on our 5th year in Albuquerque with our business accelerator. The gentleman at the end who I'll introduce, Lee Francis, he's an alumni of ours. We are opening applications this week for the Creative Tech Accelerator, which will be in Albuquerque starting in February. And applications are open right now. So if you're interested, or if you know somebody who's interested who is a great creative tech entrepreneur,
and you don't have to be in Albuquerque to apply. You can apply anywhere in the world.
There are global cohorts. The deep dive is in Albuquerque, but the cohorts are usually about 50% local and 50% from the rest of the country and the rest of the world. We have been in Denver for a couple of months now, really looking at the question of whether or not Denver is the next great place for us to bring our accelerator, whether there are enough creative entrepreneurs here and a demand for programming that is geared specifically for creative companies and creative businesses. So if you are a creative entrepreneur or you know somebody who could really help contribute to this conversation, we have a digital survey right now that is picking people's thoughts about what are the resources Denver has, what are the resources that Denver needs, and if there really is a demand and a need and an excitement to bring a creative accelerator here. So we'll put that link up at the end of the session and you can grab it. It's a 15, 20-minute survey. We'd love to get as many diverse opinions as we can. So, Publishing a Revolution. I'm going to introduce these 3 and let them tell you a bit about themselves, tell you a bit about themselves through their own words. So, starting at the right is Lee Francis.
Oh, through my own words right now.
Yes.
Got you. Sorry, that was a little bit about myself. All right. Goatse Haupa, Doathuashra, Lee Francis. I am Lee Francis. I'm the founder of Native Realities. My family is from the Pueblo of Laguna, which is located 45 miles west of Albuquerque, New Mexico, one of the great Native American centers around that whole corridor, that Rio Grande corridor on I-40 and I-25. We founded a publishing company called Native Realities 3 years ago. We publish Native American-centric and authored comic books, graphic novels, as well as games, toys, and collectibles. We also host the Indigenous Comic-Con, and we run a bookstore, the only Native comic shop in the world, called Red Planet Books and Comics in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Sweet. Yeah, right.
Anthony Cross of Salt Magazine.
Yes, yes, that's me. The founder, editor, publisher, whatever, of Salt Magazine. It's a local free monthly publication. And just show of hands really quick. I just want to gauge something really quick. How many people in the last month have picked up a print magazine and read a print magazine? Okay, it's not that bad. It's not that bad. That's actually, okay, that's going in the metrics now. Note taken. Okay, and this is the other question. How many of those would you say would be local publications, like Colorado-based publications? Hands up. 1, 2, just a couple. Okay, cool. Awesome. So what we're trying to do, this is kind of an interesting problem that we're looking at, is that a lot of the news sources that you see, that you're getting media-wise, even online, tend to be, far-reaching, sort of like Vox, Vice, BBC, media outlets that are far away from here and don't really connect very much with the people who actually live here in Colorado regionally. So we're trying to bring that level of media to this area. And that's kind of what that's the sort of problem that we're trying to solve with Salt.
And Brittany Wurgis of 303 Magazine.
Yeah, so I'm the editor-in-chief of 303 Magazine. We've been around for 14 years. We started off as print with a focus more on fashion and culture, and 8 years ago we switched over to digital only. I've been with the publication for 6 years, and since then we've switched to focusing more on the broader Denver community, culture and lifestyle, so everything you need to know about like music and what to do and restaurants and all of that.
Nice.
Great. So we're going to start with the softball. What are the biggest challenges right now in publishing and the transition it's going through?
So I think a couple of things that we have been really working on. One of the things that we've seen, so because we're specifically comic books, right? So I'm going to speak to comics. I got comic book fans. Yeah, it's a little subsection. I think it's a crossover. You should take some notes on that.
Yep.
So the industry in comic books is really moving away from singles. Most folks are moving towards anthologies. We're waiting for the binge. We're in a binge cycle. So the whole idea is that you're not collecting the way that a lot of people used to with their pull list. And because there's so much out there, I'm speaking a foreign language to some of you, I understand that, but my comic book folks go along. So you have singles, you have trade paperbacks, and you have graphic novels. The singles are the 24 pagers that come out. The trades are the ones that are the bound editions. They're the little perfect bind. They have 5 or 6 issues that are in there. And your graphic novels are those big honk and pick ones that you see on the bookshelves that everybody says they've read, but you don't really read them. So with that, what we've seen really in the industry is that because there's so much media out there, especially in comic books, the golden age of pop culture, people's pull lists we just don't have the resources anymore. Right? You can't go to a comic shop and be like, I'm pulling these every month, because you're just draining your bank account. So most people are really waiting until the trade comes out. We were talking about Saga. Unless you're a super, super collectible fan, you're going in and pulling that stuff. But otherwise, you're waiting until the trade comes out so you can read that full story, or the anthology and read that full story. So that's actually been one of the challenges for us, because we work with a lot of micro, and I mean, we are a small press, but we also work with a number of creators that are working on 24-page scale, putting out, single issue comic books. And so in the last couple of years, we really had to work with them on being able to say, like, look, we want to support this, but we're going to do a very, very small exclusive run with some extra incentives, things that we can push up our profit margin. Because really the way that the comic book industry works, especially with distribution, is there's one distributor in this country. Can anyone name it? I'll give you, yeah, he knows. So it's for them. Diamond Distributors, they have the monopoly on all comic book brick and mortar shops. So there's one distributor, which means they can set the monopolistic terms, and it's usually around 60%, 50 to 60% of your list price, right? So it's the same as Amazon, but the problem is the only way you can get in. You can't get in there anywhere else unless you're consigning with comic books. So all that being said, it doesn't make a lot of sense when you're trying to run little micro runs with that. So our biggest issue in publishing is really trying to move away from that while still being able to support the artists and the creators that are part of, especially Native, because we're also very niche in what we do, to get them to understand that the industry has changed. And it's really about creating these full featured 5 to 6 issue stories, or a full story arc that people are able to read and enjoy, but also allows us to continue to run the business because we have a larger profit margin when you work with a trade paperback rather than a single. So that's the major issue that we've been adapting to over the last, I'd say, about a year and a half to 2 years.
So before we let Anthony off the leash, just to level set for the crowd, let everyone know about the size of your guys' teams as well as the size of your readership, so that we kind of understand the scope.
So our team in Albuquerque, we've got 2 full-time, 2 part-time staff. We have a distribution manager, myself, my chief creative officer, and then we just brought a new staff person that handles all of our calendars, so an executive administrator that's been doing that work. Our readership, we put out we're getting close to about 10,000 comics at this point. We have a lot of digital as well, so it's somewhere roughly in that realm. That's pretty consistent. We'll probably see when we put out new editions of things, we'll see about 2,500 or so.
Well, kind of dovetailing off of what you said with distribution, because that is like a huge issue, not only in comics, that's also a huge issue in just print publishing in general. There's one kind of main regional magazine distributor, if you want to call it that, that's recently sort of consolidated power in the area, TNG particularly. And they, when it comes to placement and organization, they tend not to be the best, really, ultimately. Let's just be diplomatic about it. But the key there too is that there's so many different factors which is making the industry in itself difficult. So we do free for a very good reason, because we can determine exactly where those magazines go. We can determine how many of them go there. We can determine, we can figure out exactly what the best placement is. So some places might want 75, some places might want 25, it always varies. Our team right now, there's 10 people on the team, 10 to 12, depending on, the day. And also, as far as the distribution is concerned, it's 10 to 15,000. That swings kind of variable during the summer months, and we'll kind of pick up towards the winter time, 10 to 15,000 copies. And that's distributed kind of all over Colorado. And we try to get out, the key too with our distribution models, we try and get out into the places that don't have access to usual information like this, and arts and culture publishing like this. Because it'd be very easy to just hit downtown Boulder and downtown Fort Collins and downtown Denver and the downtown Springs, but we're distributing out into, some of the crazy little mountain towns and wherever we can find it, because I think if we can bring that level of accessibility, then we're actually achieving our mission. That being said, print advertising is an all-time low as far as value is concerned. Digital advertising is not really that far behind in so many ways, due to a lot of very complex and terrible bidding algorithms, which we'll probably get into later. But those all combined, where you are kind of shoehorned into one way of doing things, the freedom to do what you need to do or what you want to do, or to collect the money that you probably are deserving of a publication, because that's the biggest issue in magazine publishing right now.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, I totally agree. I
Yeah.
think, especially being online, you also have the challenge of being able to produce enough quality content with the level of revenue that you have, because you're producing, 5 to 10 to 15 to 30 articles a day, and the level of revenue you're getting from online sales doesn't necessarily compensate the people that are working for you. So we have about four full-time people, another 4 part-time people, and then we have upwards of 70 contributors. So like in terms of my staff list, there's 70 people that we reach out to. So I think, the problem with revenue is it's really about being able to kind of match that, because you can only go so much in so many directions in terms of online placement. So I would say it's really about just kind of keeping that quality of work and not overworking your people. So a lot of the times it's about, it's like almost a house of cards where you're trying to fill holes in certain ways, making sure that people are still being compensated fairly, or like contributing work in a fair amount of way, but still being able to produce the amount of content that the internet demands, which is a lot.
We initially started with wanting to pay people way more than the sort of the market value. This very naive kind of, in some ways, idealistic dream of paying writers what they deserve, and we found out very quickly that is much harder to achieve. Although we're still working towards that goal, we haven't given up. It's so much harder to achieve when you have to, like you're saying, produce 10, 15 pieces of content, whatever those may be. This could be video, this could be print, or this could be written stuff, whatever. It could be everything. It kind of has to be everything.
Yep.
And that's just that's.
Oh, and I read this.
Sorry, this is good.
And in terms of 303 Magazine, we reach 500,000 people online every month. So we have a pretty high readership, but even still, we're still struggling to make sure everyone's getting paid the correct allotment, just because, it's the amount of content that you need to produce in order to hit those numbers, in order to bring in those bigger advertisers. And I think also in Denver, since we're hyper local, we're going after a really smaller market in terms of our audience is all Denver local, 18 to 35-year-olds mainly. And so that kind of pulls your pool in a little bit more. But luckily, Denver is growing, and I think there's a lot of national attention coming in. So there is some opportunities that are growing with the city, which is exciting. But still, it's always a fight to just stay in the black.
On that happy note.
Let's start off with
The print's not dead, everyone.
Not the. Come on.
So I met with about 70 different people across Denver as part of the Creative Economy Survey, and definitely the industry that popped the most as going through the most pain and transition was publishing. That was at the top of everybody's mouths. And I think there's a lot of people out there trying to make things work. So kind of anecdotally, what are things, because the industry is changing so fast in the last 5 to 10 years, that you 303 or you personally have tried, or you know about revenue strategies that you guys have tried to make work that just didn't, and kind of what does that point to as in where are we going? Because the goal of this whole panel is where are we going?
I would say that in terms of like creative strategies, like kind of I hit upon before, is we have a lot of contributors and it's always trying to find that certain space where people can thrive. So it is kind of exhausting to kind of constantly having to find different people to kind of plug into certain spaces, but it does make you more dynamic and it does bring in a lot of different ideas. So I think sometimes like casting a wider net in terms of contributors can really help. Because it can make it more flexible, and you know, if obviously you can't pay a super high rate, you know, because you're not asking them to turn out like, you know, 30 articles a week, there is kind of more of that flexibility to be able to still pay them a reasonable fee. And then for us, we're always trying to be creative with our advertising, looking more into video. How do we really capture that in terms of digital, in terms of advertising? How do we integrate video better for ads? That's something we're really working on right now. I'd say our revenue strategy has really just been focusing on hyper-local, not going to big sites that will aggregate content and ads for you, just because you have to bring in an astronomical amount of traffic for those to even work for you. You know, you'll have to get like closer to 50,000 page views for those sites where they just aggregate those ads. So like those autofill ads that you see in a lot of publications like the Denver Post. Those are not even close to being available to someone who's smaller than that. So you have to really bring in like a lot of national pull to get those. So you really have to have a local ad team, a team that understands your market super well and can really hyper specialize your content and your ad strategy to the content you're creating, because you really can't rely on those bigger aggregate sites, because they'll pay you a really smaller fee. So it's not at all beneficial for you if you go that direction. So yeah, local everything, honestly, is really like the focus. And I know that a lot of our colleagues are thinking the same way. It's just really important to make sure you're tapping into local scene as much as possible in terms of advertisers and contributors.
Yeah, I mean, that's basically it. Because I mean, you know, yeah, we personally, we're a lot smaller than 303, but we can't even begin to fathom taking advantage of any of these bidding services. Even if you could, it's still kind of a raw deal. So it puts you in a really tough spot anyway. For us, so before starting the magazine, just really quickly as a sort of context, I worked for about 1.5 years in virtual reality and augmented reality content development. So trying to figure out the best way to create narrative film in that space, because there's really not a lot. There's a lot of landscapes and, oh, now you're petting an elephant or whatever, you know. So that exists in VR, but there's not a lot of narrative, or there wasn't, at least at that time, a lot of narrative stuff. So after that, being fascinated with AR, we tried to use augmented reality within the print publication and try and stir sort of creative advertising, creative content out of that. We very quickly realized the app that we were using was absolutely terrible. It's very expensive and it's very clunky. So in the meantime, as we've kind of phased that app out, we are actually developing our own application for this. And that should be ready within the next month or two at this point. But the key is that it will allow you to like scan any page in the magazine, content, sort of ancillary content that supports the vision and supports the story itself comes out. You can do location services, you can do, for advertisements, you can do direct location services. So you scan an ad for a business that's local, and it'll tell you how far away it is or what sale they have or whatever it is. That's, I think, really what we want to get to, because that kind of gives us a little bit more power as the publisher, you know, and it also takes out that bidding middleman system, especially as a print publication, because we can have, you know, a print publication that has the capabilities of a website and allows that to flourish. But at this point, that's still in development. So right now, we're trying essentially the same kind of tactics that a lot of us are trying, I think, in many ways, is, kind of pivot to video and try and make something work out of that, whether it's multiple small pieces of content, bundling it, trying to, engage with local businesses who don't even really know that they need this sort of thing. And that's the toughest sell, because they don't know. They're like, well, why? We've never had it before. We don't need it. So that's the biggest hurdle in that. But I think we're all kind of in the same boat, struggling with that.
So I think on our end, a couple of the strategies that we've sort of engaged is really so if you imagine the price point for most of the comics that you read, it's around $3, right? And that's because Marvel and DC dominate the industry so that they set the price points, and everything above that has to have something special to it. So you see a lot of micro presses that come out with a $5 and $10 price point. So for us, it's really trying to also create a keepsake. So when you purchase a comic from us, it's something that's, one, it's very niche, but two, that the quality is high enough, and there's a balance of how you bring in the artists and illustrators and the writers and everybody else to be able to manage that, but also something that people want to collect, right? Because a lot of this stuff is so disposable at this point when you're collecting trades or when you're collecting, various types of things, because, the market is so saturated. It's like, oh, it's another #1 issue again, right? Oh, look, they rebooted and now it's another #1 issue. And it's a gimmick that happens within the comic book industry. They keep resetting their own setup. So for us, it's really saying, like, what is personal? And so for our market niche, which is really around what we call indigenous, native folks that, really want to see authentic, dynamic representations, both native and non-native, we're trying to create a keepsake for them. So something that they can really hold on to, and something that's very precious and valuable, something that becomes something that passes down, and not just, not this idea that print is dead, but that it becomes something that is tangible and heartfelt, right? Something you pass on to your kids. So we try to do a little bit of that so that we can also create a higher price threshold, because we don't do a lot of advertising on us, because we're so micro. It's like, oh, look, you want to advertise for us? How about $20? It's not going to work out on the same scale. The other part that we've done is really, and why we have, like this tripartite business, is the fact that what we try to do is control all aspects of the market pipeline, right? So we not only publish, but we have our own trade show and our own shop, which really doubles as an office, right? So it's not necessarily running a shop. It's like, it's a tasting room. That's how I was like, we're basically a brewery for books. You can come in and there's our stuff on the shelf. Essentially, you're just walking into our office. But it's a way that we've been able to work within our community to showcase a lot of this work. We can do readings and whatnot, and when we control that, that's when we see that our sales absolutely increase. We clear, we can clear 50 books on a weekend when someone comes in and does a signing. And we can only fit like about 20 people in our shop, right? So it's a small shop, but enough that people are really interested in coming out there and purchasing the materials. So early on, we figured out we'll just start our own trade show, which ended up being the Indigenous Comic-Con, and then usually so we get at the Comic-Con, we get it's a small Comic-Con, we get about 2,000 people. We come in and we also showcase here Denver Comic-Con, Denver Pop Culture Con, formerly Denver Comic-Con. And we've done that for the last 5 years. And, on those weekends, there's 130,000 people cruising through the convention center. We make as much at our Comic-Con as we do at Denver, right? So we see the same number, we see like a fraction of the people that come in, but they're specifically looking for the work that we're selling. So that's the other part. And then the last part where we switch, where we've begun to start working out a different model in terms of paying contributors, is one of the things that we've really aimed for is how to create, through creative startups as an alumni, this idea is how do we create capacity within our own communities and our own creative artists. So rather than coming at this as a standard publisher, which is we'll pay you a percentage, here's the work, these standard publishing contracts, we're actually looking at, and we're just starting to explore this, of re-engineering this as coming in as an investor and saying, here's the deal, we're going to pay you X amount of dollars. You're going to be on the hook, so you got a little skin in the game, to be able to sell books. We're going to take the other set of books and be your first customer because we've got a wider distribution net. We'll get those out for you. Now you've got startup money, and it costs you nothing to produce it. And you don't have to go through the whole thing like Kickstarter, where you really have to invest a lot of time to see a successful Kickstarter, right? Like a 30-day, those of you that have done it, it's not just like, good luck. It's like, there's a lot of questions.
There's a campaign built around it.
Right, there's a campaign built if you want it to be successful, right? And the algorithms that we all know about that, we've done successful Kickstarters. So that whole idea is trying to shift that back to now create our role, because we've had great mentors, to also create entrepreneurs within in this publishing industry, right? So it's now saying like, now you've got the money, it costs you nothing, here's time for your creative, you can sink that back into the next investment and we'll work out the next deal. Oh, I don't know.
That's amazing. One of the huge things for creative startups is putting more economic capital and power in the hands of creatives and moving them up in their communities and their societies into positions of power and leadership because they own a piece of that. And so the huge struggle of how do you pay the creatives, your contributors and your writers and your artists, and I think we all agree that if we can't pay them anything, we lose the entire foundation of the publishing industry to begin with. So, Brittany, if you could tap into it just a little, how do we protect that? How do we carve that space so that that doesn't disappear because it would erode the entire foundation of publishing?
I think it starts with conversations with all your contributors and making sure that you're giving them what they need as well. So we always make sure when we hire, we meet people in person, that we have those conversations that are really honest. Honesty is super important in those. And we pay all of our contributors, interns are unpaid. That's pretty typical though in this industry. But yeah, it's definitely about making sure that you are on the same page with your contributor. So sometimes there's someone that comes in and they really are about the money. They're in a financial place where that's what they need. And you can tell them straight up, this might not be the avenue for you. But there might be someone who either they're are looking financial side, but they also want to develop another side of what they're doing. So, because we're smaller and we're more flexible, we always find those spaces to help them grow. I always tell every person who walks in the door that the job at the magazine is what you make it. I started off as an intern. Almost my whole team started off as interns, and we all worked our way up through the publication. And I had a lot of people come in through my door and have gone off to have really great careers in publishing in Denver. A lot of actually the food journalists in Denver started at 303 Magazine. I used to be the food editor. And so now it's, there are a lot of ways that we've been able to have those communications with people where we've seen a goal with them and we've helped them move on to the spaces they want. For example, I hired a lady who was really into food writing. I think she had a really good eye for potentially working for 5280. We even talked about it. And she's now actually an editor there and she works full time. And that was something that we agreed upon, helping her with her goal, because at that point in time, which was 6 years ago, we weren't in the position to hire her full time. And so it's about that honesty and even knowing that if you can't give them what they need at that point in time, it's about finding other spaces and resources you can leverage to help them get into that space. So I think it's creating a foundation of trust, honesty, and respect with the contributors, because obviously we all can't change the industry overnight. That doesn't mean that we should change our dreams and we shouldn't change the dreams of our contributors and tell them that it has to start with the money. So yeah, it's just really about communication and making sure that you're thinking creatively with them and that you're communicating honestly.
So just for Anthony, do you have a path from here for Salt Magazine to those salaries that you wanted to pay all of your writers?
Yes, I think that honestly, yeah, communication with what you just said, dovetailing on that, I think that is huge. That's the one thing that saved me, because ultimately when you start a magazine and you're like, yeah, within a couple of months, we're going to be able to do this. And a couple of months later, you're like, ah, crap, and you're like, ah, damn it. But what we would really, really like to do is with, again, that AR application. So that augmented reality application, we're really, really anticipating a pretty steady stream of revenue to bring us back up to scaling up. And that's already been communicated with our staff that's there right now, who's obviously not making as much as we would want to pay them due to the fact that they're doing amazing work, but they've stuck with it because they like the premise. They like what we're trying to do, and they like where they can see this going, and especially for them. When you're talking about the magazine, the business, the job is what you make it. It's very much so like that. We just recently hired a new editor who is very much so falling into place and making that space his own and really coming into his own as an editor. As far as those profits are concerned, as far as paying people, I really, really, really think that augmented reality is the future of what can help print publications. There are still very many print publications out there, and they're all going to continue to need revenue. They're all going to continue to need to sell ads. So if we can provide something that is going to make that easier for them, something that is going to help them, and also that product that is going to be delivered to them for cheap, then we can potentially start sort of reversing some of the damage that's been done in some ways, from what it used to be.
Yeah, I think I touched a little on, sort of how the direction that we're going and really being able to support creatives within as entrepreneurs themselves, which is essentially the function that they have to be when they publish their own books, except it's generally the company that sees more of the resources, the big publishing houses, because there's 5 of them, and then they have all these little subsidiaries. Most folks aren't seeing, they're seeing 8-9%. From if they're lucky, if they've got a really good agent, which means they got to hustle on the ground anyway. So they're hustling basically for, as we all like to see in the creative industry, exposure, for these bigger companies. So for us, it's a way to be able to say, like, look, we're still going to make the money back from what we're doing. We're going to make a profit on it because we're also a distributor in that space. So we've created very similar. We've created our own distribution line to be able to get books into the hands of people, which also meets our mission. We want to get more of these books out to the populace, to Native young people, et cetera, et cetera. So we are mission driven in what we're doing. We're also entrepreneurial. So we, to keep the doors open and keep everybody paid the way that we like them to, it's the same, we have the same sort of thing. So with the folks that are contributing, this new model that we're adopting is really a way to be able to empower them to work in that. And then for our own internal staff, getting to where we want to, I echo everybody at the table. It's like, yeah, it's being honest, it's being upfront, consistently. I think the consistency of being honest, it's not like, we're almost there, and when you're not even close, that's,
just lying.
You're straight up just lying to your staff, right? So the idea is to be consistent, and transparent in that sense of like, hey, everybody, this month has not been so good. Or, hey, everybody, this month has been great. For us, we try to reward our staff because we know that they're, we're trying to get them up to that level that we like them to. And so it's like, let's go to a baseball game. Or, we get free passes to Marvel movies. So everybody gets to go on out. It's running a comic shop, y'all. It's one of the best days, too. We'll get that call from the Marvel folks, and they'll be like, would you like tickets to Black Panther? We're just like, yes, please. Yeah. Send them on. They keep driving a FedEx envelope. It's great. So we try to do a little bit of the value added for the folks that are in the space. So it's not simply exposure, but it's also the idea, the last part that I'll add to this is we often get into this mode, especially where we are, but I've worked in the nonprofit industry for a number of years. We'll call them thankless jobs. It's a thankless job. Well, it's thankless because no one says thank you, right? So the main thing is to say thank you to people. More people will do more work if you say thank you and value what they're accomplishing, even if you're not getting them, I can't pay you, $35 an hour. I know you're worth that because you're amazing and you contribute all the time. I can pay you this, and I can say thank you for your hard work and do whatever I can. I'll send you to a Comic-Con, we'll go traveling, take a night off or whatever. So I think that that's one of the most important things on our end is as we move into that direction, it's also remembering to say thank you to all of our folks because that builds that relationship and that trust. So people are more willing to be able to work towards that as you are pivoting, positioning, expanding that marketplace, being able to drive towards essentially what we all want, which, the end goal of wild success.
Lee, do the creatives that you work with already understand that they're entrepreneurs, or is there an education gap?
I think there's an education gap. I think that's partly what I think there's a mix. So we have a really great where we got the idea from is there's a great artist that we work with who does these amazing painted mashups, and he's Dene, he's Navajo out from Arizona. And he does these mashups of Shiprock and Star Wars, right? They're amazing, right? His name's Ryan Singer. He's an award-winning artist. He paints stuff like that. Came by the shop and I was like, hey man, do you have prints or posters? What are you doing with this? Because that's high value art. That's $1,000, right? When we're walking around, not a lot of us can $4,000 when we go to Comic-Con or something. So I was like, dude, you can sell these for do you have stuff in your back catalog that's a $20 print? That we can run, we'll print out posters for you. And so he was like, and he absolutely knew he was an entrepreneur in that, right? Like, cause he's an artist, right? He's hustling, getting his stuff in galleries. But I was like, there's this sort of mid-level. It's like, you're gonna sell one of those $1,000 paintings once every 3 months. But you can sell all of these little tiny $20 posters. You can sell 100 of those, every single month, right?
There's an artist that works with us that has the exact same mentality too. He already knows it, you know what I mean?
Yes.
He's printing out, he's doing block prints, and he's just hustling them 5, 10.
It's so fast. And especially when you come to a Comic-Con or any trade show or anything else like that, people like, and especially if it's like a high quality print, you're not like printing it, it's not like a Kinko's or whatever. Like, sorry, Kinko's. But if you get a nice, really like good quality poster that can go out or good quality print that can go out, you can, because again, people want the keepsake, but they also, it's really beautiful. Like you pick the right art to do that. So you sort of create that model. The conversation with him, it wasn't a huge learning jump. The conversation I had with him was like, hey, we'll be your exclusive distributor. We'll be the only ones that can distribute outside of you. You can sell them to whoever you want because you've already got your own list that's separate from my list. So we're not overlapping our constituencies, our customers. Because I got a different client base when I go to Comic-Cons and whatnot, or and you go to art galleries. So we didn't overlap on that. I says, don't give me your front side work because that's the stuff that you're going to want to sell and you don't want to undercut your own market. And I says, here's the deal. We'll print it out because I can print them out for like about 20 or whatever per poster. I'll give you half of them. We'll take the other half, and that's the deal, right? No cost to the artist. We pick up the cost, but I know I'm going to move those posters, and I have because this is now where I think we're on our 3rd contract. These are short run contracts with them, right? So he got it like that. The minute I said that. And so when I now talk to these other folks, they're just like, once we were able to lay out the template and now we have empirical evidence that it works. So it's a lot easier of a learning jump for folks that we've been working with around that entrepreneur. It's like, I don't necessarily say, you're an entrepreneur. Like that's a hard sell, right? But being like, you as a creative artist, this gives you a better chance to be able to continue to be the artist, to be the creative. And you don't have to jump into the business. Like you got to do your own personal finance stuff. You got to do all of that stuff, but you don't have to do like the distribution and marketing, and all these other parts that you would just do naturally. That's something that we can handle on our end.
I just wanted to touch
Yeah.
on, when you said the word exposure, like a light went off in my head. That's like
Was it a light or was it like an bomb?
Yeah. Well, it's definitely like that buzzword. I feel like a lot of people use, and creatives hear a ton. And I think that's something that we as employers in the creative industry sometimes have to use ourselves. I try to personally avoid it because I do think it has that connotation. But I think when you hear that word, you have to make sure that you're also thinking, is this meaningful exposure?
Bingo.
Yeah.
Bingo.
It's like, is this something that's actually valuable to me? Is exposure not just for the sake of numbers and eyeballs, but is this something that's going to actually help me?
Yep.
And usually I start with the conversation not by saying, this is how many readers we have, this is what we do. It's really about like, where do you see yourself? What do you want out of this job? What do you want out of this writing? And so making sure that, as a creative yourself, that you are being able to clearly communicate that. And for us to also make sure that we're also clearly asking those questions and making space for those conversations. So yeah, meaningful exposure is very important.
Yeah. I
Thank
like
you.
that. Meaningful.
So I have a chip on my shoulder when it comes to Comic-Con because I was going to that before it was even remotely cool.
Heyo.
And it still baffles my brain that it's so popular. But there is this partnership between live participatory aggregation events and publishing that there is a balance that can amplify each other. And 303 Magazine has Denver Fashion Week. So we'll start with Brittany of like what the value of the big live events, what can potentially go wrong because they are expensive, and how do you make that amplify each other for the magazine?
Yeah, so at the magazine, Denver Fashion Week and 303 Magazine started around the same exact time. They were very symbiotic. I think that their visions and identities have grown in different ways. I still am very much a part of both. And I think we're actually very much in the process of trying to tie those two back more together because I feel like they are in a lot of ways, more separate entities. I think, yeah, revenue models based on events are complicated. I think we typically we have events as our revenue in some sense, but we do keep it pretty separately. Like my budget for editorial is not impacted by the success or failures of our events. So they, like Denver Fashion Week, stay more insulated. It does help. Like we have a publisher keep like filling those holes when we're not in the black on the editorial side, but we do keep them separate. But I do think it's really important to have events still because, you know, millennials especially are looking for experiential things. That's where they're going to spend their money. And so it's important to also engage with the community because we talk about local so much, but there's no way to engage with your local community except for online. It can, I think, weaken your stance. So it's really important to still have events that make sense for you. We've expanded even with events. We did 303 Music Fest, which was like a little mini music festival. We had 14 bands. It was so hard. It was so hard to do. But it was really fun. We've also partnered with a local events company, Two Parts. We've worked with them from their beginning and from when I've been there. And they've done a lot of great successful stuff. We partnered with them with the Underground Music Showcase. That was really successful for us as well. But yeah, in terms of events, I think it makes sense to tie them together, but they're also an insane amount of work and they can be a huge risk. I think because we had an events model from the get-go, that gave us a little bit more of an advantage. Our publisher is very much in events. That's his bread and butter. So that gave us an advantage in terms of having the know-how to do it, but it is really complicated and it can be risky, especially in Denver when there are 1.5 million events. Like literally just, I think, you know, in terms of even concerts, we write a monthly concert roundup and there were 600 concerts in Denver this month. So, you know, we're trying to run one of those, like, you know, concerts. So it is really, really crazy to like be competitive and, you know, but we have stuck with it because I do think it is important. But I think it's really, if you're going to do events, start small, do what you know, and try to throw a successful event and not try to push yourself too far where you can't deliver. Because if you don't deliver a good experience, then it's hard to get return people. So yeah, I definitely encourage people who are local, really focused to do events, but just, you know, think smartly and conservatively when you start on those.
Yeah, so we started doing events kind of out of the get-go, sort of straight out of the gate when we started the magazine. We started doing smaller, again, trying to engage the community kind of events. And those all were, you know, they generally always are pretty successful. Episodic events usually are also pretty successful. There's a hip hop night that we sponsor. There's a couple of festivals that we sponsor. And the biggest one that we recently did is we sponsored a stage at a Rise Music Festival.
And editor brought that up.
So, oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
He was all your magazine.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, so that hey,
there we go.
engagement.
Yeah.
Excellent, it's working. So the interesting pitfall about Rise that I realized after the fact that it wasn't necessarily not a success, it was a success. We were able to sort of engage and interface directly with people. I was there the entire time, next to the stage, talking to people, doing the whole thing that you would do. The one thing that we noticed that was interesting is that when you have an online presence and you're also trying to build an online presence beyond just a physical magazine, you need a digital component to that interfacing, right? And when you're at a Rise, this is just a very particular problem that this has. There's no Wi-Fi, there's no signal, there's no cell service. So when people are taking pictures of the bands on your stage, they're not going to post it tomorrow. They're not going to tag you tomorrow because that was yesterday. They don't want to post that stuff. So the thing is that we lost out on a significant amount of online engagement, I think, because of that. And that's not the fault of a Rise by any means. It's just the way that it kind of panned out. And that's a situation where you kind of don't anticipate it until it's already over. The community engagement on it was fantastic, though. And really, we continue to like try and sort of find smaller events. You know, there are some really interesting things actually happening in Longmont of all places, and in some of Boulder County and up into Fort Collins and all over the place. So if we can get into the communities themselves and really sort of interface with them there, that's a success in our book.
Yeah, the main thing on that is it's so time consuming.
Yeah.
And since I have hosted events when I was working in my nonprofit life. I've run school-wide events when I was an educator. There's nothing that prepared me for running a comic come, right? It's basically 3 separate events simultaneously. You have your workshops, you have your trade show, and then we added like a little film festival with your guests, right? They have all of those going on all at the same time. And the first year that for me was just like, that was just this crazy leap, right? We were just like, all right, we're doing it because I'm not going to wait around until somebody else does it. We got to do it now. And so perhaps a bit, we'll say a bit extreme in terms of the choice, right? But we had a great turnout. We had 1,200 folks in our first year. We had 50 vendors, 20 guests. It was 3 days of, festival. And for our first year, we were just a hair short of going in black, right? We were just a hair short of drinking. So it was really, and then, we made up a little bit on what we sold with our exposure, our meaningful exposure. I love that. As well as the books that we put out there. So, but I think now this is year 3, and a lot of it has been for us internally has been how do we separate out from the editorial side, from what we're publishing to the event side, and they're actually starting to become 2, real separate entities in that way. And this other this entity is now taking on sort of its own life and getting its own staff and getting its own, folks that are able to run that. We got some great volunteers. So I think for us, really it's coming down now. It's like with most entrepreneurs, it's just like, let's charge ahead. And then we're like, oh yeah, we should look at the numbers. Let's check the analytics, right? So now we're in this really great space that we actually can chart those analytics, right? It's really hard to chart after year 1. You're like, that's 1 point. I don't know
What's the scale?
I don't know what the second point's going to be yet, right? So we have 1 point of data. So now we have 2 years of data, and we're actually seeing our 3rd year. So at this point now we can really be able to dive into those numbers and say, what's that cost benefit analysis, right? Is this something that that is still a benefit to us, which I think it is under a mission, but also how are we then using this now that we've been at it for 3 years? Because it usually takes about 3 years of a festival. Any mid-level festival takes about 3 years to really get it off the ground, right? You work out all the bugs, you get into the spaces that you need to be. Denver Comic Con, did not hit its stride until about year 4, right? First years it was kind of moving, but now it's like, man, that's the Rocky Mountains. That's the festival, right? That's the Comic Con. So, you can sort of see the same sort of trends. You can do the analytics on it now. And so now it becomes something that's like, yeah, it's really a great engagement thing, but is it benefiting the publishing anymore? Yeah. I don't know. I mean, I'm going to see after this year, because now I'll have 3 points of data. I'll have 3 festivals. I can be like, all right, we can look at this. How is it generating back in terms of either interest, media attention, or all of the intangibles as well as the tangibles. So, I mean, I think that's the balance. I love putting on the festival. It's a great way to meet folks. We've made incredible connections for, the double bottom line, our mission-driven line has been it's accomplished everything we wanted to. But again, we also have to be sustainable. So, and that's the part where, a festival definitely is like, is that sustainable for what we're trying to accomplish over here, as opposed to what it's wanting to do on its own.
You're just telling me all these things that are bringing other ideas to mind.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think, to kind of reiterate what you're saying, it's so important that if you create an event, sometimes when it's successful, like you said, it takes on a life of its own. You have its own team, you have its own marketing plan, you have its own revenue stream, and it's really hard to keep them tied together too, making sure the trajectories of both are moving in the same direction. So yeah, I'd say, if you are starting an event in terms of publishing or an organization, looking at that 5-year plan or that 10-year plan of how do you keep them connected, and reevaluating every year, like, is this still hitting the main goal that we created it for? Because they are just these incredibly fast-moving targets, and they come and go, and often they can be kind of siloed in your brain because they can be so hyper-stressful. That even I think sometimes my team, we can put it on the back burner in terms of all year long planning and strategy, because it's something that we block out of our minds for a little bit. But yeah, so it's really difficult to keep this together, but it's definitely one thing that, if you're going to start events, that you need to make sure you're thinking about that plan of how to keep them connected over the long term.
We should have all talked like 3 months ago, because somewhere along the line, Creative Stars, we decided to throw a downtown Denver coloring party as part of Denver Startup Week, which is out there right now. And Jenny and I were on top of ladders this morning, hanging 8-foot vinyl in Union Station. And thought, well, is this gonna help us with our mission of educating entrepreneurs?
Yeah.
Right.
Felt the same way
Uh-huh.
banners at Arise. It was like
Right.
2 in the morning.
Yeah.
It's like, really?
Yeah.
Is this what is going on?
We did get a lead from a gentleman who says he owns a building in downtown Denver and he really wants some, windows covered, but that's not quite.
Wow.
That's,
Yeah. Sponsorships. though.
Y'all doing that? Get over here.
Like, sponsorships are the same issue of exposure, like as,
Yep.
it's meaningful exposure. And it does take time. You will probably choose the wrong things because you don't know how it'll play out later.
That's always been the case. We sponsored a couple of different earlier on, just trying to get our name out there.
Yep.
We sponsored stuff that we've done, a significant amount of promotional work for, and then we see absolutely no return value whatsoever. And it's kind of just a risk that you have to take. And I mean, at its essence, I'm looking at a lot of these events of like, okay, well, at least I'm there, I'm on there. At least that will be trying to create some kind of name recognition, even if it's never mentioned, you know what I mean? Or even if it's this big, that just might be the things that you have to suffice with. And really you just try to like make sure that there's an equal exchange of value in that. That's your biggest goal, which is almost unachievable.
So come to the coloring party from 5 to 7.
Okay.
Aside from that, Anthony said the word risk, and so I'm going to keep one more question, then we're going to see what kind of lovely nerdiness comes out of the audience here. So a lot of times, risk goes with the capital and the opportunity to take risk.
Mm-hmm.
So where are the opportunities to take risks that could turn into growth for the publishing industry when you guys are so constrained?
That's a really good question. I mean, I've been pretty fortunate because at the onset of this, we had an investor who threw down some money, was able to take the risk even of starting a print magazine, which that in alone is kind of a huge deal. And then actually, as of recently, to sort of stabilize us through the rest of the year and even beyond that, Colorado Enterprise Fund, I'm not sure if anybody here is familiar with them. We went into a loan agreement with them and we've been working with them. They've been absolutely fantastic. And so the key is that, we can take risks that don't really directly affect our monetary side. We can take risks on our image. We can take risks on our distribution. We can take risks on things that we've already created or that are already out there. But right now, for us, particularly looking at where we are and where we want to grow, we're in kind of hunker down mode, financially. We just have to basically try and become really sustainable, really solid, and then grow beyond that. So there are little risks that you can take, sure, but realistically, there's not anything huge. And we have to just kind of avoid it. We can't, and there's a lot of people offering you crazy stuff, pie in the sky, kind of dreamy things that we have to turn down sometimes. And that kind of sucks, but, it's one of those, it's just kind of the given of the game. Yeah.
Over here? Okay. Making me think. That's why I was like.
Oh, yeah.
I think in many ways, everything we've sort of done has been, there's been a mid-level of risk, but there's also this sense that we have a sense that we have a niche market. So it's been like, oh yeah, we're going to do an Indigenous Comic-Con. We have a built-in audience for that. So it was a toss-up saying like, well, we know there's people out there, right? We're not just kind of shooting out into the dark, but how many of them are going to show up, right? And we've seen that success. And again, we had some early help from creative startups that launched a comic shop. We had some early stuff from friends and family, as we all know how this works, right? So we got a little bit of help. And a lot of, people was like, where'd you get the money from? I was like, and I bootstrapped a lot of it, right? Like I had some saving, like what we all do in this. So I think now, we've turned a lot away from the risk. And we don't it's not that we flatten, but we don't tend to take as much expansion risk as we used to. A lot of it is continuing to push out, like the big next step is this sort of, turn with, the sort of investment model with creatives because they're running their own full content. The other part with us is to finalize our distribution model. So we're coming into the field as a distributor because there's so few of those as well. So that's sort of our next big risk, but it's not something, it's a stretch in terms of some of the capacity. That's where we're taking the risks, right? It's like, how are we stretching ourselves internally, and how far does that bend until it breaks? How many hours do I have when you're hanging banners, or you're there putting a pipe and drape at 3 a.m, you know, and you're trying to crank out signs for guests and whatnot, right? So as it continues to get more streamlined, I think that risk tends to, you know, to minimize. There's still that, you know, that threshold though, where we're looking for that sustainability. We're in the same kind of metrics. It's like we're right there. We're profitable, but you know, that's we'll see how that plays out, right? You know, you got one bad convention and you're one accident away from being cooked. So I think the risk now is trying to be like, okay, so where do we put the energy and the time? Not necessarily that the dollars anymore, because we got enough dollars, but it's the time dollars. Right?
Yeah.
So it's that time of saying like, oh, we want to do this. What's the metric for that? How do we find, you know, is that cost beneficial? And then I think the last part is, and then when do you cut it off? Right? So when do you say like, this isn't working, we need to stop doing this, right? Because that's where the risk really comes in. The risk is like, you're just continuing on, and then you're just throwing money at something, and you're not really looking back and being like, uh-oh, this isn't working anymore. We have a problem. So I think that's for us.
Way better point. Good God. That's just killed that.
No, I definitely agree, like creative risks are a big part of, you know, being a creative, right? So making sure that you are expanding your content. Actually, I listened to a talk from the founder and CEO of Spirit of Media, who owns Denverite. And he talked about, you know, the positives of the negatives of being like a startup publication. Like, can't cover everything, you can cover anything. So there's that, you know, sense of, you know, taking the negatives of being a startup publication and turning them into positives like that. So flexibility. We definitely have grown a lot and we are more established, but we are still a very small team and we're a very young team. And so we do have a lot of that flexibility and that creative drive where we don't have like a board of directors or, you know, a ton of members. So that allows us to be a little bit more creatively risk-taking. Although I think that everyone struggles in getting into ruts when you finally feel like after years of, you know, stressing over risks and all those millions of hours, still like pushing yourself to do those things. But yeah, I'd say creative risks are really important. You have to innovate, you have to expand, and especially if you have the fluidity of being a smaller team, to still push yourselves to not relax too much, because you need to make sure that you are still being able to beat the people that maybe have a higher revenue stream than you, and that you're thinking further ahead. And like kind of going back to one thing that early on in terms of revenue that we took a lot of, not risks on, but where we focused a lot of our attention was social media. And it kind of surprised me that a lot of local publications were not paying a lot of mind to their social media growth. And we threw a lot of time and attention. I actually started off, I still run our social media. I started off as a social media editor. I've had every single job at the publication and made up like 6 more. Yeah, so we really put a lot of time and attention in our social media, and that's actually a huge part of our revenue stream. And we've actually seen a lot of the bigger publications follow suit in terms of trying to catch up to our follower numbers. Like, we have the most followers on Instagram. We're, you know, pretty close on Facebook with a lot of the other major publications. And just like using that space as a revenue stream. And so, you know, making sure that sometimes, you know, when everyone's looking right, they're looking left.
That's another thing out of Denver. You will not find a creative that only wears one hat.
No.
They wear 10.
Yep.
Who's got questions? Because they're dying for me to stop throwing questions at them.
Yeah. Hey.
I run an AR studio. I just moved here to Denver, actually Boulder. You mentioned AR earlier. I walked in a little bit late, so I apologize if I missed any of your comments, but what kind of content are you guys driving? Is it coming from the editorial side, from the advertiser side, and how are you pushing that out?
We're trying to integrate both. So, I mean, we're really trying to find as many artists as possible to be able to create this kind of content, as well as, you know, because it's a new medium. You know, you when you're creating that kind of content, you're creating it in a different software than, you know, what you would be used to as just a regular artist. So it takes a very specific sort of skill set to be able to do that. One of the hopes of the application is to be able to make that more accessible to basically every artist, so that we can start pulling in sort of creatives on that side of things. We also are trying to expand the advertising side of things. I hope that kind of answers your question as far as like where we're going with it. But like we're looking for basically everybody.
Who's pushing the demand for it? Is it the audience or the advertisers?
Well, it's us right now. I mean, the creatives really. So we've done testing, we've done surveying with our advertisers that are out there. They're all very, very excited about it. It just has to work first. So I think the demand is intrinsically coming from the advertisers because it allows them a different level of accessibility and visibility within a platform that, you know, is pretty broad reaching. I mean, we can get 10 to 15,000 copies out and have them in places, and those ads are all multifunctional and there and very specific and handpicked and curated. That's a huge advantage to, again, one of these rotating ads that you might see from a bigger, you know, Denver Post-esque type deal, you know. So I think intrinsically, when it comes to this, there isn't a huge awareness yet. There hasn't been a huge awareness campaign yet. We're still kind of in development and trying to push this out, but we're hoping to use SALT as the guinea pig for this, to be able to get people even just in the habit of using their phones to look at a magazine, which that alone as an operation doesn't really make a lot of sense right now. But the beautiful thing is that when we did pilot it for the first 3 issues, it caught on very quickly. It was very interesting to watch people do it once and then go back to it all the time. Even just album reviews, creative content, you know, you can scan an album review and you're listening to their music instantly. So as far as that's concerned, I think there is a demand from the people, but it hasn't been explored yet. There's no public awareness for it yet. So I wouldn't say it's coming from there. I'm saying right now it's the businesses that want it the most. Because I think it's, you know, it can help. So. Yeah.
So there's, we talked about advertising. There's, and actually publication, publishing. There are new things happening in the cryptocurrency, blockchain industry. What's on your radar and how do you see yourself being able to take advantage of those?
Honestly, we haven't gotten there yet, but there is a new publication coming out, the Denver Post alumni, the Colorado, I think it's Colorado Sun. Yeah, Colorado Sun. So I think it's really just interesting to see how they advance in that space. So I think a lot of publications nationally, internationally are really looking at them because they are taking pretty much the heart of a major publication and inserting it somewhere else and using blockchain. So we're not there yet. I think we definitely are very interested in seeing how they succeed in it. But yeah, I really look forward to it and I really applaud their courage to do it.
So we've had approximately 3 conversations about this in the shop. We're not entirely sure where it comes into with the publishing, but I know there's some tendrils in something. This Albuquerque's actually doing some really cool work around cryptocurrency and blockchain type stuff. We got some really great folks within creative startups and some other folks that are really working on this. So there's definitely like there's a brain trust down there in Albuquerque for us, which is awesome. We're trying to we're trying to figure out about that is because our clients, our customers, really native folks. Like, how are we approaching that within reservation communities? There's a lot less of the technological access to it, but it does have the potential. So, to be really game changing within these types of communities. So we were exploring some ideas around how we could utilize that at the Comic-Con and Digicon. And that's probably about as far as we had the time capacity to really to address that and give that its due. But we're hoping that we're going to start exploring that a little more. I think that's we know there's potential and recognize it in theory, and it's just trying to put everything into practice. And we're not quite at that precipice yet, but we'd really like to be.
There's a lot of interesting developments with, I don't know, hands up, anybody heard of basic attention token yet? Anybody? 1, 2, 3. Well, yeah, get out of here.
You gotta ask the question.
So basic attention token essentially is a new blockchain sort of like software. Essentially, they released a white paper. It was really astounding. I recommend anybody to find the white paper and read it. When you're interested in publishing and media, they're talking about disrupting the very model that we've been banging on about up here about how we, as digital publishers, can't go to these big advertising companies that do a bunch of bidding and screw us out of money, all this whole thing. So they're trying to fix this problem. Now that could be very interesting. There's a lot that needs to happen. I think that's a first step in the right direction for this protocol that's coming out. But what we're looking at essentially is trying to incorporate that somehow with AR and augmented reality to promote mass adoption of this kind of, when you're looking at a decentralized ad network where it still advantages us monetarily. But that is still sometime in the future. We still haven't even really agreed what the first step is going to be. I like to think that it's going to be something like basic attention token or something else that's developed on the blockchain as something that can ensure that revenue is going to the right people. But I don't think there is a consensus yet. I think we all just know that something is terribly wrong and that needs to change.
Yes.
That we can all agree on that. So that's like step one. Next step is to say, okay, well, how do we figure this out? And how maybe does blockchain play into that in some way? Even if it's just a tangential thing that helps, it's not something that is directly, interfacing with your customers or anything like that, your viewers or readers, whatever. If it's something that can even help you on the back end of that or whatever it is, there's ways that can be applied to it that we still don't even know that it could be developed in the next probably 2 years.
And that's when we'll be ready.
We'll all know everything in 2 years. Come back in 2 years.
Well,
Come to 2 years later.
I've got a panel tomorrow. How does blockchain help my non-crypto startup?
Okay.
So if
Excellent.
you want to show up at 2
Well
o'clock
played.
tomorrow-
Yes, sir. Where's that at?
Industry Station.
Industry Station.
Cool. 2 o'clock tomorrow.
2 o'clock tomorrow. Hey, this is how it works, right? I love it.
Industry Station happens to be at 1515 Arapahoe. It's not.
Oh,
It's at 1801 California.
1801 California.
Where are you at? Which industry are you at?
Industry Station Rhino.
So that's one's at 38.
Oh, sorry, sorry.
Yeah, there's 38. So there's two. I think industry stations are 38. Right?
Yeah, they just had the wrong address of the meeting.
I don't know. They're both in Rhino, so.
Oh, okay. Well,
Yeah, good
We'll show
question.
up early.
Anything.
Yeah.
I don't live here. I have no idea what to say.
They're close. They're pretty close together. So if you go to one, you can find another.
Saw a question back there.
He stole it. I was going to
Ah,
mention. It's on civil.
Right, and civil is really interesting. I'm not quite sure reading over the Constitution is very basically, they have that, is it called a Constitution? Does one of you can answer that? Yeah, it's called, it's like that operating agreement. There's a couple of these other blockchain-based startups that are coming out that are trying to sort of land on this idea that journalism needs to be protected. And part of me wonders if that isn't just sort of a sign of our times and kind of buzzwordy in some ways. And maybe the word blockchain also being in there is also kind of buzzwordy, maybe. But the thing is that it's like, okay, if you're pushing it in that direction, you're probably not doing any harm. And we'll see how that plays out. But ultimately, it's the content that needs to be sort of protected, authentic content, and specifically the creators of that content. And so if that's not really apparent, I don't know if it's completely being as advantageous to the people that it needs to be right out of the game.
Yep.
So that's kind of civil in a nutshell, I suppose. But
It's
Right.
the revenue model piece of that, of like giving more control, whether it's a token or whatever, back to the user, and allowing them to create some of those funding sources.
right, exactly. And there's also some like microtransactions that play into that, which would be really interesting. But that's, again, it's kind of like we'll wait and see.
Yeah.
Can I push that conversation just a little bit further? The BAT, the basic attention token, and civil, all these models are really kind of try to drive your publishers strictly towards a subscription model. How does that change your audience dynamic or your messaging out to your audience to say, you guys need to subscribe to my content instead of getting it for free and then I'm selling your eyeballs to my advertisers?
Well, and I think that is partly an issue with it, that I have with it. But if that's the way, again, if we all agree on this and we go that direction, I think there are some funky ways that we can manipulate that and sort of, again, do microtransactions or smaller, one of the ideas too that has been brought up to me repeatedly is like, in the crypto world, rather than blockchain world, is an equal exchange of advertising. So like you volunteer your data and that company then like can sell that data at a higher value because that data is relevant to the advertisers that they're selling it to in that way. So that there's like there's a new idea there forming, and that's kind of down the road a little bit. But with the subscription model, we've tried to kind of stick with that, not online, but in print. It's a very difficult slope to kind of climb up. So I'm actually completely uncertain if that's going to work. If it follows microtransactions, I think it has a chance. So if it's like you view an article and you pay 0.2 of a cent or something like that in a cryptocurrency, in a token, maybe that could work, but it's all kind of completely foreign because there's no rallying, there's no organization, there's not a lot of access to that information anyway, because blockchain and crypto stuff isn't really being normalized by any sort of media outlet at all, rather. You know what I mean? It still feels inaccessible to a lot of, at least the people that I talk to and the readers that I have, you know, and trying to at least get them to a point where it is accessible is kind of a goal for this next 6 months, so that we can even at least have that conversation, you know?
Yeah, I agree that I'm aware of the subscription model, because online at least, because it's, you know, when you look at the nature of the internet, it finds its way around such things. You know, things create based off of like the freedom of the internet. So, you know, when you're spending, you know, putting up a paywall on Article 1, you know, there's been plenty of times where you click on a post article and you might bounce out because you don't have that paywall. And so people are going to look for other places to find the content, because that's the nature of the internet, right? There's always innovation of ideas and something new coming up. And that's why it's so different for the internet versus being, you know, in print, because there's obviously more singularity of it. You know, you grab a paper and it's not like you're being, you know, funneled by literally an endless amount of those things in front of you. So we're not subscription based. I don't know if we ever will be. But yeah, I'm wary of it. And I think that's why I'm wary of blockchain too, because it will drive people to a subscription base. And I just don't know subscription based for the internet as it is makes sense for digital media.
Well, and there's ways around it right now. I mean, if you just copy the link from the Denver Post and put it into an incognito tab, that thing goes away. So now you get free Denver Post articles. But that's the issue, is that like, if it goes on the blockchain, it might not be that easy to do that. And then we've locked it in.
Yeah. And then people move on from you.
Yeah, exactly.
And you lose.
Well, here, oh, sorry.
I'm still learning. This all sounds awesome. I'm coming to this thing later. I'm really curious to see how this fits in, because I'm in the same boat, but because we have, you know, so much of a spectrum in what we do, we're trying to do like an experience-based subscription model. So it's a little bit more beyond, like, rather than just getting content, we're building in components to that content. So it's like, not only do you get a comic book, again, you can read it online, you know, but everybody can share it, right? Because I mean, like, we don't lock off our content. I've had, you know, it's like university folks are like, I'm going to download a copy and then can I send it out to everybody? I'm like, I'd rather you didn't.
Yeah, so that maybe they would.
But, you know, essentially what we'd really like to see, you know, is how when we're building out a subscription, it's that experience, right? So we think of the subscription box concept, right, that everybody jumped onto, you know, still it's all out there. It's that mystery and wonder when you open the box, right? Now it's so saturated, everyone's like, it's another box, right? Yeah. So how are we building out some of those, you know, experiences that come from going to a festival or listening to music for the first time, or this is why the AR stuff really fascinates me as a blockchain. I got to figure out how all this works.
You know, it's dovetailing on that. Our subscription model that we have for Salt in print, we really try to, and we continue to incentivize it by offering discounts at local businesses around the Front Range, so that you get like a little members card. You can go around the Front Range and anywhere in the Front Range, Fort Collins, Boulder, Denver, Colorado Springs, the whole lot, and get discounts from that. And that worked to some extent, but it still wasn't enough to get people to dive into that upfront charge. Because again, it's kind of, it's tough for people, I think, to commit to something like that. And if you want your content to be seen, you want, again, digitally too. And this wasn't a digital subscription, this was purely print for us. So it's a little different in this sense. But the key is that if you want people to commit, that if you can't prove that exchange value, you're gonna lose.
I'm gonna grab the gentleman in the back.
Oh yeah.
All the way to the back.
For Brittany and Anthony, how do you determine what content to publish in your publications?
I spend a lot of my time on Facebook, like a lot, making sure I'm watching every single piece of content go out, see how it's being engaged on all of our social platforms. But I personally manage our Facebook because it's a huge traffic driver. And I think it really does show kind of real time, like how are things being engaged with your users. And I think it's really important that if you are a publisher, or you are an editor, that you are paying attention to that. because that's how you learn about your audience and you get to see it real time. So it's really, it's twofold, because obviously we can't publish, there's a cat convention coming, every single day, like that, silly stuff that the internet loves. So there is a fine balance, right? You have to think of what is popular and trending with our community, but what also does your community need? So, and it's sometimes finding those halfway points. I've actually been really interested in how our arts coverage has kind of found that halfway point. It does super, super well on the internet, but I think it also contributes back to our community in terms of supporting local people and local artists and local initiatives. And so that's kind of like I think our sweet spot in terms of like the internet and community. But yeah, in terms of deciding to publish, it's really, you have to first of all set goals and make sure that you have like a set of philosophies that you're following, and that you have a reader that you want to reach, and that you're really talking to them, and publishing content that you believe that they need and they want and they value, even if sometimes it's not always the most popular on the internet, but also paying attention to things that are popular and making sure that you're giving it back to the audience while also not going so far into the sense that you're just, a bunch of gifts on BuzzFeed. So
Yeah, you don't want to cheapen your own network.
Yep.
I mean, yeah, because I mean that's a pitfall that a lot of people fall into when they're trying to promote a social network, is they'll just start posting pictures and boosting them very tiny amounts once a day, and that will drive engagement and it will drive perceived sort of growth. But really, if you're trying to then publish meaningful content, you can't really do that, And so for us, what I usually use, the metric that I usually use, I talk to a lot of the writers that we have on staff. And usually what I've always done is I've tried to hire people that have good ideas. They might not be the best writers. So a lot of those are brought forth from the staff, you know what I mean? And we are those philosophies that you were talking about, this absolutely beautiful summation of it, because you do have to have those principles. You do have to have what your kind of goals are that your content wants to do. And one of ours is to, kind of dig into the human experience and talk to people, get really in-depth interviews and do that. So I can't then turn around and publish a meme, because that kind of defeats the purpose of the philosophy, And so the key is that we have to stick true and ultimately hope that, and work towards that the audience that we are engaging are dedicated enough to then share it and be that on that level to be able to then spur growth. And of course, there's a little bit of sort of swinging, doing show coverages and doing certain stuff that isn't too far sort of on the outskirts of your philosophy in that way, but that can still fit into your sort of content vision, your content and all.
Yep. And I think that, do you want to add anything? Really know your reader. So when I came on board 6 years ago, I think I really saw, and the team that I ended up fostering was the space for people that were, younger millennials or moving to Denver, or like myself, I'm from Denver, but getting to know Denver in a much different way. That maybe felt that Westward was too old Denver and 5280 was just too old. That's, no offense to them, like at all. I really love both of those publications a lot. But that's, that's kind of the niche. And we look at our audience, and it's actually interesting because we have 60% of our readers are under 35, and that's much higher than most of the other publications. And that was my goal 6 years ago, is to kind of hit that demographic. And just recently we were really going over the comparison numbers and just realizing that we definitely had achieved that. And that was something that we went after for a really long time, was just focusing on what that reader wants, what are they interested in, and speaking to someone that maybe hasn't been spoken to more directly. Because I think that, those more like longer publications, they were speaking to maybe a crowd that had already been there or had maybe aged out of that space. And so that's where we found our niche. And so I think that will really help you be a successful publication, is if you find an audience that's maybe not been spoken to or spoken to in a way that you think you're providing. I feel like our music coverage has kind of capitalized on that a lot. We really focus on local music in a lot of ways. I know that, there was a lot of feedback that was missing in Denver, and so we really focused on that. And recently we were talking about doing local album reviews, and they don't do great in terms of like hits to the website, but I do think they're really important. So we continue to do them because they're community driven. So and they hit
direct engagement, yeah.
Yeah, and it hits the demographic and the reader that we value, and that's why we sponsor and are part of events like the Underground Music Showcase. It's kind of all ties back together. But yeah, so knowing your reader is really important.
Yeah, no, I mean, our demo actually skews a little older than you guys. We're 25 to kind of 45 in so many ways. And I think that just comes from having a print publication.
Yeah.
Anyway, the thing though, yeah, I mean, you're saying knowing your reader, we came out of the gate, the very first issue, the very first cover story of the first issue was on sexual assault. And sort of, all encompassing in the Me Too movement and the whole thing that was happening and continues to happen, obviously, but was really picking up kind of in January of this year, really going into its stride. And on top of that, we really had, in Fort Collins, we had kind of a reckoning with that even on our local scene there. So that was very important for us to come out strong for that. We've done a lot of stories like that where we, covered the Colorado education system and how that is not so good anymore. And so, this is kind of, we have attracted a reader because we were new and we came out of nowhere. And now we know, and we've gotten to know our reader and we've surveyed and talking to them, obviously, it's this huge thing. And now we know who they are and we can publish for them and kind of give them and grow what it means, what they want, what they think they're going to like, and kind of experiment and play with that. As long as you have a base, you have the ability to do that.
So last question here.
Have any of you experimented in any way with the pay what you want model?
For in online or print or both?
Both.
Yeah, I mean,
That was not working in Mexico.
no, I mean the thing is I know a couple of other literary magazines. I know a lot of those guys, and they're fantastic. I think Stain just moved from Fort Collins to Denver not too long ago, and they do a sliding scale pay what you want model with a base minimum. And yes, but I can't sell print. You know what I mean? Like I think the infrastructure that would be needed to sell our print magazine would be way too much, and it would also cut down on our engagement in that way, because what a free print publication does, it also provides you with presence.
Right.
You are all of a sudden all over the place, and that's good, and it's accessible, and you don't have to have money to access our content in that way. And so we started the game with that kind of vision in mind, is that it's like accessibility, authenticity, those kind of key goals in mind. And so starting to charge for it would also just create calamities within the point of sale and who are you going to get to. And a point of sale of subscription almost loses the point of it. You know what I mean? When you go onto that way, unfortunately, we played with it, but the infrastructure that's needed, I think, is just too much. And I haven't even thought of that online. That could be interesting, but again, run into the same issues as a subscription model in some ways, I feel like.
Yeah, I agree. We, just kind of stick with the free side of things just because we're internet only. So.
Yeah.
We have a whole range. So we have not done pay what you, if you come to the shop, then we can do a pay what you, like if you're like, I have $1, I want this comic, and I'll be like, all right.
You came here.
Partly we can't because we also move mass quantities too. So not only do we have our online portal, but we work out with schools and universities and all the rest of that. They're ordering blocks of 20, 25, 30, whatever. They have their own wholesale price list. So we try doing that, and it becomes a really weird, wonky scale. And we would undercut our own market in terms of because if a student can basically get in online and pay 1 cent, then why are they going to buy from the bookstore? Then why is the bookstore going to buy from us? Right? So we have to sort of still play in the game. So unfortunately that doesn't work unless you're in person. So when it's in person, man, I'm a marketplace seller. It's like, what you got? I'll take it. I'll get out of here. There's some comics. Go. But we also try to offer so with all of our stuff, because we're not a single publication, we also try to offer a really wide range. We have free stuff online. We've got dollar comics. We've got 5, 10, 15, 20, 25. So there's a range for the client customer base to be able to sort of pay what they want for some of the content.
Okay, palate cleanser. Because revolution and change is very angsty and it's all of that.
That's right.
Yep.
Traditional or the future, what is the piece of publishing that you protect, you cherish, you hold on to, that's not going to change? It's the piece that gets you up in the morning.
The New Yorker. I read the New Yorker religiously. And it's something that I value a lot. And yeah, I hope that publication doesn't change. I absolutely adore it. And it is very different from what I do for a living. But I value it very highly. And I want my writers and my readers to feel the same way. That's like the number one thing I push off on my writers. Read the New Yorker, read their stories, read their profiles, read their food reviews, read their music reviews. You know, I'm obsessed with that publication. And yeah, that's definitely the piece of publishing I hope continues on, especially because of their amazing coverage they've done on the editorial side, but also news breaking side, because they're a huge part of the Me Too stories. Yeah, New Yorker.
That's a so good. Honestly, you know, I can think of a couple of publications to echo that idea too. Like Bomb Magazine was a huge, and that there, if you're interested in this, Bomb Magazine out of New York, really interesting model, kind of a nonprofit donation-based thing. You should check it out. It's really, really weird and cool. And they're very arts-focused, interview-focused. Very cool. Paper mag as well. But honestly, you know, it really, I think the biggest thing for me is that, you know, when you all came in here and I asked you how many people had picked up a print magazine, like about 50 to 55% of you raised your hand. And that's a good sign. That's a good thing. I think for me, I think the print side of it is so important. And that's kind of why we're developing that augmented reality system, to be able to kind of keep that going. I think there's such an added value of having something that is tangible and physical, you know, and for us, it's like, I went to different print houses to smell the magazine to make sure that the smell was good, you know, and that it didn't, because trust me, I've got magazines that smell bad, but the key, yeah, it's terrible. So the key though is that if there's a tangible experience there and there's something you can say, hey, borrow this, take a look at it. It's like, it's the same sort of love affair that everybody also has with books still. And there's a reason why we still have books. And there's a comeback for it with vinyl and film photography and magazines. The publishing industry is getting stronger. It's just the infrastructure in the new world that needs to be figured out for print to survive. And that will happen. But that print in general is the one thing that I don't want to lose.
I will echo the print part of that. For me, small press, local comic books. The ones that you can only find at your comic shop, right? And you're supporting, you know you're buying it, you're supporting that artist or that local company. I just got back from Melbourne, Australia. I was like, where's your local section? They're like, you don't want to look at any of the Marvel? And I was like, no. I support local artists. I can buy that on Amazon. I don't care. So that for me, there's nothing finer for me than, I did it last night. I went to one of the breweries, Barrel something down on Broadway, and I just pulled out, you know, this wonderful Australian weird ass comic, because the local stuff is so weird and crazy and so delightful. I think that's where the creative expression is. Right? That's still where we have that creativity when we do local publishing, when we do this. I mean, when we're talking, as we talk about entrepreneurship, we always talk in sort of the big broad swaths of terms. And, you know, it's like, how are we going to make this world changing and revolutionary? The small books are still revolutionary.
Yeah.
The small publications are still revolutionary because they're the ones that we know that are craft we love. We know they're the ones that people just decided to be crazy and freak out on the page, right? And we know that it's what drives that part of the creative economy, that small part of the creative economy, that we always have to be able to, otherwise we don't have content creators if they don't get the chance to sandbox and do weird shit, right? Like that's it. So that's why I love, for me, I don't want to see like local, small, independently produced comic books or zines or whatever go away. That's my favorite thing.
The founders of Creative Startups wrote a book. He's gesticulating wildly because he is featured in the book.
I'm in the book.
It's a book. It's paper. You have to buy it on Amazon, but we will send you a paper copy that smells like paper.
There's an ebook also.
There's an ebook also. If you or anybody you know want to be a leader in where the creative economy is going, particularly in the United States, because we are behind compared to a lot of areas in the rest of the world, that is the book for you. And it features entrepreneurs and entrepreneur stories that are really up and coming with where we're going. So as a member of Denver Startup Week, please share, because a year from now they will look at how many times things are shared. So share the goodness. And there's exactly 3 minutes for any questions you guys want to say out loud. You want to come out?
Yeah, come on, questions.
I have one thing to add to that.
Yeah.
I feel like, yeah, you guys always give me good ideas.
I know.
I think in terms of publishing, it's not the traditional sense, but photography, not using your iPhone as a publisher. That is so important, and that was something I also thought, like, when I was thinking about the vision of the magazine, when it first started, was local photography is so important.
Yep.
When we were looking at online publications locally, they were all using their phones.
Yep.
All of them. And, you know, it was really frustrating to me as a photographer and to the photographers I know, because there are some insanely talented photographers in the city. And we utilize a lot of them. And it's something I'm by far the most proud of our content, because we have really excellent photographers, and being able to give them space to like showcase their work is really exciting. And so I think I really like, in terms of publishing, especially digital publishing, to use a real camera. Like, not saying that I take a lot of photos on my phone. I do think that there are a lot of ways you can use your iPhone, and you should. I think like Instagram stories is a great example, but, you know, making sure that you're also caring about the craft of photography and storytelling through photos.
Yeah, that's been absolutely, we're on the exact same page for that, because that has always been the bane of my existence, is that, you know, you have these print public, a lot of them that I've seen, and they don't do good quality photos, and they just kind of, oh, this is easy,
Right.
this is the easy route.
Yep.
And really, yeah, we built a photo series called, Faces of the Front Range, where you hire a photographer to go around and do pictures of people. And then we also just feature a photographer just stand alone and give space for them. Because, yeah, it's so important. And as also, you're a photographer too, so, yeah, hey, me too, so, yeah.
So thank you, Lee, Anthony, and Brittany, for your time.